Tonight, the conflict in the Middle East takes a dangerous turn. Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon prompt fierce retaliation from Hezbollah. Yulma, good evening. I'm James Glenday, coming to you from Ngunnawal country, and we acknowledge others with connection to the lands of the ACT. This is ABC News. Also tonight, an alleged domestic attack turned car crash leaves 6 people injured in Sydney. 4 years and 4 million rides on. How well do Canberrans follow the rules? And in bad news for snow bunnies, one ski resort is closing and another is shutting large areas early. We begin tonight with a major escalation in the conflict between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. Just before dawn local time, around 100 Israeli fighter jets carried out a series of airstrikes across southern Lebanon in what the military claims was a preemptive strike. In response, Hezbollah fired hundreds of rockets towards Israel in what it says is stage 1 of a major retaliative operation following the killing of one of its commanders. Our Middle East correspondent, Alison Horn, reports.
Wow.
Rocket fire dots the night sky on Israel's border with Lebanon. The distant boom of missiles heralding a new and incredibly dangerous moment in the Middle East. Israel says it had launched missile and airstrikes as a preemptive measure over what it says was a looming Hezbollah attack.
A short while ago, the IDF identified Hezbollah terrorist organization preparing to fire missiles, rockets towards Israeli territory.
Hezbollah says it's fired hundreds of rockets in retaliation to the killing of a senior commander last week.
In a self-defense act to remove these threats, the IDF is striking terror targets in Lebanon from which Hezbollah was planning to launch their attacks on Israeli civilians.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a meeting early on Sunday with members of his cabinet. Israel is now in a 2-day state of emergency. Hezbollah is a formidable foe with more than 150,000 rockets in its arsenal. The militia is backed by Iran. All eyes will now be on what Tehran decides to do next.
And a short time ago, our Middle East correspondent Alison Horn sent us an update. She says many people in Jerusalem are on edge tonight.
Well, there's certainly a heightened sense of fear throughout this region as people wait to see how the situation evolves. Officials in Israel have imposed further security measures throughout central and northern Israel, including restrictions on the number of people who are allowed to publicly gather and privately gather together. Schools, universities and workplaces have also been asked to close unless they have access to an immediate bomb shelter. The Israeli military too says it's increasing its readiness around the north. It is still currently striking into areas in southern Lebanon. It is unlikely this Hezbollah attack will be the trigger for an Israeli ground invasion into southern Lebanon, but both Hezbollah and Israel have warned that all possibilities are now in play.
Alison Horn reporting there, and the attacks have again raised fears of a broader regional conflict. The Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong has urged all involved to exercise restraint and de-escalate the situation. The ABC's Global Affairs editor John Lyons takes a look at the risks.
Iran now holds the key to what happens in the Middle East. The biggest question right now is, what will Tehran do? Hezbollah says it's fired hundreds of rockets in response to the Israeli attack. That's a fraction of its capability. Hezbollah is backed by Iran and it won't engage in a full-blown war with Israel without Tehran's support. Even by itself, the militant group is a far more formidable threat to Israel than Hamas. Hezbollah has as many as 150,000 missiles in its arsenal in southern Lebanon. That's more than enough to overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome missile defence system. So if Iran does decide that now is the moment to attack Israel, it would give the order for Hezbollah to unleash vast numbers of those long-range rockets. The eyes of the world will now be on Iran. How it responds in coming days will determine whether there'll be a regional war.
John Lyons there. To other news now, and a horrific scene unfolded in Sydney's south this morning after a man went on a stabbing spree on a busy road. It's alleged he attacked his partner while driving before crashing his car and attacking others, including a police officer. Dozens of terrified bystanders watched on while others bravely stepped in and tried to help.
The shocking aftermath of a chaotic crash. The 58-year-old suspect runs from a police taser while slashing himself with a box cutter before being pinned to the ground and arrested. 5 minutes earlier, the man had been allegedly stabbing his partner while driving erratically along Old Bush Road, then T-boned another car on the Princes Highway.
We heard a big bang and then came out to arguing and then realised that he had a blade.
Bystanders who ran to help were confronted with horrific scenes.
Not thinking about it, I'd started running across the road and not thinking about my own well-being. I was more worried about the lady on the ground and the other guy near the door to get him away from her.
Another man was slashed in the stomach while protecting the woman. He was taken to hospital in a serious but stable condition.
They've obviously gone to render assistance to both people, and then they were faced with a male armed with a box cutter. Quite frightening, but very, very brave on those people's behalf.
We just did what we thought was, right at the time.
Multiple witnesses say the alleged attacker was shouting about conspiracy theories.
He was just yelling like freedom, you all need to open your eyes, and then he'd swear.
This is where police eventually managed to subdue the man and arrest him. But witnesses have described how when he was first hit with the taser, it barely even seemed to affect the man and he was able to keep running. Looking down here, you can get a sense of how far he was able to run, even while injured, from the scene of the crash. Police say the suspect is known to them and they are treating it as a domestic violence incident.
They were in a domestic relationship. Again, there's no history that we're aware of. There's no apprehended violence orders between the two, but we're definitely domestic related.
The man's partner was taken to hospital in a critical condition. A police officer helping in the arrest was allegedly slashed on the wrist, and 2 other people were injured in the crash itself. The Princes Highway was closed in both directions for hours as police tried to piece together what led to this terrifying crime. Sarah Geraghty, ABC News, Sydney.
Now, concerns about injuries and dangerous behaviour prompted Melbourne to join cities like Paris, Rome and Toronto in banning or winding back their e-scooter networks earlier this month. Here in Canberra, almost 4 years after their introduction, police say that while most people are doing the right thing, some rider behaviour is both illegal and unsafe.
4 years and 4 million rides.
Woohoo! I think the scooters are great for the public. It's good, it's handy.
There's always a liquid amber at the end of the journey and they glide downstairs with a bit of gusto.
Even years on, concerns about safety for riders and pedestrians remain.
The problem is they're so quiet and they just appear from nowhere.
Sometimes I've seen a bunch of kids without the helmets on. Some kids sometimes jump on 3 kids on one scooter. Can sometimes look a little bit dangerous.
One e-scooter fatality was recorded in the ACT in 2022. A young woman, not wearing a helmet, collided with a car while riding her privately owned e-scooter. But getting official data on injuries is impossible. Canberra's hospitals and walk-in centres don't code emergency department presentations by mechanism of injury. But police on the beat do hand out fines to riders who take passengers, use their phone or fail to wear a helmet.
That sort of risky behaviour is something that is of concern to police, particularly given how vulnerable e-scooter riders are. Essentially, they're not afforded the same protections as riders in other vehicles.
But infringement numbers have fallen substantially in recent years. So far this year, only 17 have been issued. That compares with 127 in 2021. Riding a scooter while under the influence of alcohol or drugs is also prohibited, but how often this happens is unclear because police don't distinguish between drink driving and drink riding. The ACT government says it will release more data about e-scooters and is funding research about rider behaviour in an effort to improve safety. It's also now investigating claims that Beam has been deliberately exceeding its scooter cap and depriving the government of registration revenue here and in several other cities. Beam has apologised and rejected the suggestion it had been running any kind of a scheme. Lottie Twyford, ABC News, Canberra.
After 8 years in the political wilderness, the Country Liberal Party has won government with a landslide victory in the Northern Territory election. The ABC has predicted the CLP will win 16 of the 25 seats in the NT Parliament, with Labor reduced to just a handful, including the loss of its former Chief Minister, Eva Lawler.
A historic embrace and a moment of change as the Country Liberal Party ushers in a new era of territory politics.
Tonight's result is a victory for hope and opportunity.
Born and bred Territorian and former lawyer Leah Finocchiaro will become the Country Liberal Party's first ever female Chief Minister. As of this afternoon, the CLP was predicted to win 16 seats in NT Parliament after running hard on a platform of stamping out crime and helping pull the Territory out of its $11 billion financial hole.
It's an honour and a privilege. We've heard loud and clear that Territorians want change, and the work starts tomorrow to deliver that.
The night saw huge swings against Labor, with the party that ruled for 8 years wiped out, losing key members of its former cabinet, including Chief Minister Eva Lawler, who spoke to party faithful in a sombre concession.
I know Territorians want a change. We've heard that loudly and clearly.
Labor didn't just lose votes to the CLP. The party punished for its handling of environmental issues, with big swings to independents and the Greens.
It shows that when you provide a positive alternative, people will change their vote.
Coalition senators sounding the results as a warning for the Albanese government.
Now that the Northern Territory is delivered a Country Liberal Party government, I think the coalition, we can be quite confident in going toward the next federal election.
In terms of what were the key issues in the Northern Territory election, it really is around law and order, very much territory-based issues.
A new leader voted in to try and deliver change to fix some of Australia's toughest challenges. Matt Garrick, ABC News, Darwin.
The federal government is defending moves to rein in NDIS spending by billions of dollars, saying the debate has been hijacked by misinformation. Legislation passed by Parliament aims to curb spending on the scheme by $14 billion over 4 years. It sets up new powers to investigate fraud and more closely defines what can be funded under the scheme. The Greens and some disability advocates have criticised the changes, saying they amount to cuts, but NDIS Minister Bill Shorten says the scheme will continue to grow.
I listen to the people who say do nothing, change is too hard. These people are dangerous because if we don't do something about the cost growth, there will be no NDIS.
A new report has revealed the annual number of drug overdose deaths has almost doubled over the past 20 years. The latest figures show more than 2,300 people died in a single year, the vast majority involving 2 or more drugs.
Jen Furby lost her 25-year-old daughter Nicole to overdose in May 2022.
Often I'll have a moment of realisation that I'm never going to see her, and I just cannot believe it.
Nicole died with 4 different drugs in her system. A report from the Pennington Institute found 73% of unintentional overdose deaths involved 2 or more drug types. Opioids turned up in 80% of those deaths, followed by benzodiazepines, antidepressants, stimulants and alcohol. Heroin is driving the increase in opioids, and experts are also worried about the increasing risk of powerful synthetic opioids such as fentanyl and nitazenes.
The problem is that they're appearing in counterfeit pharmaceuticals, but they're also appearing in cocaine and in heroin.
The data shows deaths involving stimulants are also increasing.
In relation to Indigenous Australians, we've got a huge overdose problem, about 4 times worse than the general population in Australia.
Pennington Institute Chief Executive John Ryan is calling for a national overdose prevention strategy. He says less than 2% of the drug budget goes to harm reduction, while 2/3 goes to law enforcement.
Even though we know that we can't arrest our way out of these problems.
The Federal Health Minister Mark Butler has labelled the report findings as concerning and in a statement said the government is actively monitoring the emergence of nitazines alongside continued reforms and investments in drug treatments. Nicole was Jen's only child. Her grief will be with her forever.
She was my best friend, and I'm pretty darn sure if she was sitting here with us today, she'd say the same about me.
She wants people who use drugs to be part of the conversation about how to save lives. Rachel Carbonell, ABC News.
German authorities have arrested a 26-year-old Syrian man over yesterday's fatal stabbings at a festival in the city of Zolingen. The so-called Islamic State group earlier claimed it was behind the attack, which killed 3 festival goers and wounded 8 others. German officials said a terrorist motive could not be excluded and, following a tip-off, raided a refugee hostel. The stabbing attack has reignited the debate on national security in Germany, and the government has called for unity.
We won't be divided in times like these, but we stand together and will not allow such a terrible attack to divide our society.
In France, authorities have arrested a suspect they believe is behind an arson attack on a synagogue in the country's south. Police allege the man deliberately set fire to 2 entrance doors of the synagogue, then set alight 2 cars parked outside. One of the cars exploded, injuring a policeman. President Emmanuel Macron condemned the attack as a terrorist act. 2 NASA astronauts stranded in space during a Boeing test mission will return home next year on board a spacecraft owned by rival SpaceX. Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams were on an 8-day mission designed to test Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. But the capsule suffered technical issues, with some of its thrusters failing while trying to dock at the space station. NASA today confirmed that after an agency-level review, the astronauts will come home on SpaceX's Crew Dragon flight. Boeing's Starliner will return without a crew. The billionaire founder and chief executive of messaging app Telegram has been arrested at an airport north of Paris. French media reports that Pavel Durov was detained as part of an investigation into the lack of moderators on the platform. Police are looking into whether the app enables criminal activity like money laundering, drug trafficking and the sharing of paedophilic content. Telegram boasts nearly a billion users and is very influential in Russia, Ukraine and former Soviet countries. Well, each year, tens of thousands of people in Japan suffer so-called lonely deaths, where their bodies aren't found for weeks, months and sometimes years. Many are elderly, without family or friends. As Japan's population continues to age, some in the community are doing their bit to support the most vulnerable.
This is grim work, but someone's got to do it. Takuya Shiota has come to clean up a lifetime of possessions after the elderly resident in this apartment died. With no friends or family, the occupant was undiscovered for 3 weeks until her rent went unpaid.
The deceased passed away here, and the smell was quite strong because of the fluids that came out of her body. So we cut out all here and disinfected it.
Japan's suffering from a lonely deaths crisis. For the first time, the government has crunched the numbers. It's now expected some 68,000 people will die alone this year and left undiscovered for a prolonged period.
It's increasing considerably. We do roughly more than 100 cases a year.
Japan is getting older. Its population shrinking. Once bustling suburbs and villages are emptying and elderly people are left vulnerable. It was 20 years ago when Dr. Osamu Yamanaka opened a clinic in one of Yokohama's poorest suburbs. Back then, 4 people a day were dying at home alone, many undiscovered for long periods.
Some were skeletal if no one found them. I was young, and I thought it was unforgivable.
Dr Yamanaka pioneered home care.
There aren't many people who are willing to deal with people from the lowest strata of society, but he is willing to come to me. I appreciate it.
If I wasn't doing it, there would be an awful lot of lonely deaths.
Services like this are now much more common across Japan, but there will always be limitations. Dr Yamanaka says communities need to fill the gap.
If they do not socialise with their neighbours, they will end up with a solitary death. It's very difficult to prevent it.
It's a challenge Yoshiko Sato has accepted. At her massive apartment complex on Tokyo's outskirts, there are almost 400 elderly residents living alone. Today, she's visiting one of them. Yoshiko Sato set up a Zero Lonely Deaths program 2 decades ago.
Every year, 4 or 5 people died alone. It was like that constantly.
It established a network of volunteers that check up on local residents, leading to a remarkable improvement in the quality of life.
She usually visits me about once a week. I look forward to cooking with the vegetables she brings me. It's what makes my life worth living.
Yoshiko's mission of Zero Lonely Deaths was soon achieved.
After 5 years, the number of lonely deaths became 0 for the first time.
But she worries about the future. A future where people are becoming more withdrawn from their community.
A community must be built by everyone, but that's not possible in Japan at the moment. People are becoming selfish.
If everyone was more considerate of the people around them or looked after them, there would definitely be no more lonely deaths.
This is a crisis that's only going to get worse. Japan has the world's oldest society, with 1 in 10 people aged over 80. And as the country continues to grow old, there's increasing pressure on the government to do more to care for the vulnerable in life and in death. For those on the front line, government support for community groups is a priority.
There is data that loneliness is the biggest factor in shortening life expectancy. In Japan, there's a lack of community ties. I feel it's very common.
A need to keep connections until the inevitable end. James Oaten, ABC News, Tokyo.
To sport, and St George Illawarra have 4 teams on their tail in the race for the NRL finals. The Sharks denied the Dragons a valuable win, while the Roosters had plenty of joy on the Gold Coast.
Jared Warrior-Hargraves' 300th match with the Roosters was a mixed bag. The enforcer was given a timeout on the Gold Coast, but his side looked sharp in the 26-point win over the Titans.
Crichton has a hat-trick.
Gold Coast won't make the 8, but Lofi Khan Pereira has a real chance of winning the Ken Irvine medal for top try scorer.
Gives it to Khan Pereira. He dives in for another one. He's got a hat-trick here today.
Kalen Ponga and Jack Cogger starred in Newcastle's 20-point win over South Sydney last night.
And Newcastle extend.
I'm excited about my footy, I'm excited about the team's footy, and I'm excited about these last 2 rounds.
The Knights stay in the race for a top 8 spot, along with the Raiders, Broncos, Dolphins and Dragons. Bindi Bryce, ABC News.
In the AFL, Carlton's finals hopes are now out of their hands after a 2-point loss against St Kilda. The Blues now face a nervous wait for the result of the Fremantle and Port Adelaide game currently underway in Perth. Meanwhile, the Western Bulldogs got the job done against GWS in Ballarat, assuring them of a finals berth.
With their season on the line, the Blues were on the board in the first 30 seconds, but the Saints had brought their A-game. In the second term, one of the ugliest incidents of the season.
Oh no.
Umpire Stephen Paperno subbed out of the game with a head injury after he was struck by a water bottle, the AFL working to identify the culprit. The Saints continued to make the most of their last outing of the season.
Oh, the Saints fans love every second of it.
But Orazio Fantasia's brilliance kept Carlton's spark alive, and the margin was cut to 9 points at the last change. After trailing for most of the game, the Blues finally got themselves in front.
Fantasia to Motlop! Jesse Motlop!
The tension was palpable as the Saints continued to push forward, and with one last roll of the dice, the Docklands erupted with a Jack Higgins special.
It's a goal! Higgins has kicked the goal! Siren!
Carlton's finals hopes hanging by a thread and now out of their hands. Before the bounce, the conditions threatened to derail the Dogs' September plans.
All the years we've been playing down here, this is probably as windy as it's been.
The Giants won the toss, but were kept to just 3 first-quarter goals, kicking with the breeze.
He gets that to move!
After the change of ends, it was the Bulldogs' turn to make the most of the advantage.
I can smell blood here, the Dogs.
5 straight goals helping them to a 17-point margin at half-time. As the Clouds moved in, the midfield got a move on.
Marcus Bontempelli.
And the Giants were kept at bay for most of the third quarter. It was a race against time to beat the weather.
I think I just saw lightning.
And the Dogs won out.
Liberatore against the grain.
A 4-goal run in the final quarter, sealing the win and the Bulldogs' place in the finals. Erin Marsico-Vettere, ABC News.
Australia's Oscar Piastri will start from third for the Dutch Formula One Grand Prix, but says he should have done better in qualifying. Piastri couldn't match teammate Lando Norris's flying lap, ending up half a second behind the Brit who took pole. Championship leader Max Verstappen starts from second.
Just didn't do a good enough job, really. I think the first half lap was pretty solid, and then the second half just wasn't quite what I needed. So yeah, clearly the car's been very quick this weekend, and yeah, a little bit disappointing to not be a bit higher up.
The Paralympic flame has begun its journey to Paris. The flame was lit in the English village of Stoke Mandeville, considered the birthplace of the Paralympics. It'll travel via the English Channel to France, where over 1,000 forerunners will bring it to towns across the nation. The Paralympic Games begins on Thursday morning with the opening ceremony, followed by 11 days of competition. Now, Selwyn's Snow Resort will remain closed for the remainder of the ski season unless conditions improve. The resort made the announcement on its social media accounts earlier today. Perisher has also announced it'll shut lifts at Smigan Holes and Guthiga next weekend, blaming recent warm temperatures and a lack of natural snowfall. It says it is becoming unsafe to operate lifts in those areas. Well, to the rest of the weather now, and tonight's viewer photo comes from Chris Elsley, who captured the cloud starting to build up near the Arboretum earlier today. Thank you for that, Chris. Now, 10 was our low at the airport this morning, 9 in Tuggeranong, and 19 degrees our top. It was very pleasant outside this morning. It became less so this afternoon as some of those isolated showers and storms rolled through. And some severe thunderstorm warnings remain in place this evening around our region, but not in the ACT. As mentioned when we saw those pictures of the snow, it is relatively warm in the mountains. 11 degrees today at Perisher Valley, and it received quite a bit of rain too, which is not good news. 24 degrees, it was the top at Moruya today. In the capitals, Brisbane hit 27, Sydney 23 and Melbourne 24. On the satellite, you can see how the cloud moved through our region today. A high pressure ridge is going to lead to clearer conditions tomorrow, but you can see a couple more fronts are on the way and expected to cross the region this week, which will bring more warm air and more gusty winds. In the capitals, Brisbane is headed for 31 degrees tomorrow, Sydney 24 and Melbourne 18. In our region, some more rain could fall at the ski resorts. Fingers crossed there could be a dusting of snow too. 5 the forecast top for Perisher, 23 is expected at Batemans Bay. Yass is on track for about 15. Here in Canberra, after a low of about 5 or 6, we should get to 16 or 17, and there's the slight chance of a shower in the morning. Sunrise is 26 minutes past 6 and sunset is 16 to 6. And looking ahead, 17 degrees is forecast for Tuesday and 18 for Wednesday, and it might be a bit windy then too. And that is the latest from the Canberra newsroom for this Sunday evening. I'm James Glenday. It is always lovely to be with you. Our team will be back at the same time tomorrow night. And until next time, Yarra, good night.